One Piece has a long list of pirates, marines, and citizens that make up and inhabit the world around them. They are built from the ground up through the words of their heroes and the actions taken by their parental figures. But the ground that they stand on might also be a character of itself. Much like real life, the environment you grow up in has much more value than that of a living being. Islands hold much of the weight of its dwellers, who direct its customs, ecology, and architecture, yet is still the de facto shaper of its climate and weather. As such, the islands are essentially characters of the One Piece universe, and Ichiro Oda knows that if he wants to do a series about seafarers, you must put as much attention to the destination points as you do to the adventurers. For this list, I'm looking at the islands of One Piece and ranking them based on their cultures, history, and impact on the story that is told in. So make landfall with the top 10 islands of One Piece, starting with
Number 10.
It's close to midnight, and something evil's lurking in the dark. Hee hee! Thriller Bark is the first land-made ship to ever be sailed, and while some might disqualify it due to it being a ship, it wasn't originally an island based from the West Blue, so it technically counts. Located in the mysterious Florian Triangle, this pirate ship is feared by many as its ruler, Gecko Moria, lures unsuspecting sailors to his haunting island to lock them behind his giant teeth-shaped gates and steal their shadows. Only those brave enough would make their way through the entrance into the island's many unique spots. Its graveyards are filled with rotting corpses waiting to bite you, ghosts controlled by a phantom princess fly around the dead forests, and an invisible man stalks the halls of a giant Romanian-style castle. Chains protrude around the island as the mist covers a giant mast adorned with the pirate flag of Gecko Moria. Its inhabitants are mostly undead crew members, yet remnants of living pirate crews long lost cower in the woods, forever cursed to never see the light of day again unless they want to be turned to ash. Thriller Bark is ruled by fear, and uses it as a means to force the strong to submit to their ranks. But that all changed when the Strahd made landfall and sought to liberate the slaves from its dark master. The aesthetic of the island is very cool and gives some really awesome callbacks to horror films and zombie movies in particular. It's like one of those wacky Scooby-Doo locations, but with an added Oda twist to it. Granted, as much as people love the island, it also isn't as indispensable as, say, other grander locales. It's more like a fun sideshow attraction than a living, breathing environment, and the gothic atmosphere can be a damper for some that might not get into it. In fact, after the Straw Hats and Moria wrecked the place and released all the shadows from the island, Thriller Bark has just become a wasteland of lifeless marionettes and stone. Although it hasn't faded away from obscurity as we did see again on Full Dead Island, it's not a land most fans want to go back to. But still, it was a fascinating location for pirates and others to get spooked by. Then again, it's a way better fate to be in than what's actually beyond the Florian Triangle.
Number 9.
Coming from a place of countless winters, I'd say Drum Island would have some pretty good shorts weather. Formerly the Drum Kingdom, Drum Island is housed in everlasting winters and is most notable for its cliff spires that reach the cold skies. The Drum Rockies are the most iconic mountains in One Piece, and smack dab on the very top is Drum Castle, once belonging to the ruler of the land, but now hosting a young witch doctor who lived for more than 140 years, so she's basically in her springtime of youth. However, it's the history of the island that really puts it on the list. Once ruled by a more beloved monarch, his son took the throne and used his authority to hold the country under arrest, taking the best doctors as his own and banishing or killing any who were not seen as expendable. Despite its history of being one of the most valuable lands for where medicinal practices were refined and performed, it was left helpless in the hands of a cruel tyrant. That is, until a certain quack came along, found a way to cure the country's sickness through a different method of medicine, and died passing his will on to the next ruler. With Wapol now dethroned and Dalton taking the stand, the country renames itself the Sakura Kingdom and begins its reconciliation. Drum Island is a winter wonderland filled with histories of hardship and perseverance. And while it's not one of the most highly memorable islands based on character or even landmarks, it is still one of the better winter zones in the series. While a detour than the main cast, it brought with it beautiful imagery and a rich sense of nature and community. But that could just be because I'm Canadian and we live for the cold. Or we just have giant rabbits with sharp teeth and can snowboard down avalanches. What? You don't have those down south?
Number 8.
It may have taken forever to get off this island, but at the very least, its culture and ardor made up for it. The island of Dressrosa has had an interesting history in the One Piece canon. Under the rule of Don Quixote family before being replaced by the Riku family, the land has been remade several times under the rules of those in power. The only reasons flowers bloom throughout the country is because of the peaceful treaties with the neighboring little people right next door. And for the longest time, the people lived very happy lives despite the country being in poverty. Until Doflamingo reclaimed the throne through manipulation and string tactics to usurp the royal family and build a whole new system. While Dressrosa saw its economy burst in spices and gold, the citizens still loyal to the previous monarchy were torn from the living and made to live in service to the tyrannical pirate. Some of those people became toys and brought joy to children and single mothers across the land, even if they were the husbands and fathers to most of them. The Corte Coliseum is the biggest attraction of all, once used to pardon criminals through combat, now used for blood sport and entertainment for the masses. Taking inspiration from cities and countrysides of Spain, it's a place that echoes a twisted timeline to what would happen if a pirate took over a country. It's certainly one of the most vibrantly colored places of Star Wars I've ever been to, and is home to many moments in the series' story, especially since it is also the location of one of the longest arcs in the series' history. And maybe that's why it's not as high on the list as others. You can only love an island for so long as you can stay on it, and while there's tons of relevancy and history to take from Dressrosa, it more serves as a metaphor of slavery and an example of how misinformation campaigns and false pretenses can corrupt an otherwise just nation. Either way, it's still got its fair share of support, and unlike Thriller Bark, it's still a place of passion and romance for anyone to dance in.
Number 7.
I feel like Sebastian the Crab is gonna come out and sing about life under the sea at some point here. It took quite a while to get here, but Fishman Island is something most people will always stop by before reaching the last stretch of the Grand Line. A place where mermaids swim and play with their hosts, and fishmen show off their underwater skills to the hardiest of sailors. If only humanity thought of them more as people than fish. Fishman Island is a main center for all fishmen and merfolk, but it's probably the only safe haven for the species to survive in, as thus the population in the island cannot contain that many people, and campaigns over the years have been set up to immigrate citizens of land, yet with not much success. But through the actions of this island's heroes, the dream to one day see the real sun might be in their grasp. Fishman Island is a paradise fueled by its economy, more so than any other island in the series. From coating ships, to diving underwater, to clothing brands like Criminal exporting their goods to above water, sailors are their main source of income on the island, even with the racism that comes with it. Not only that, but it has a mermaid cafe and the Fishman Dojo, with its most shocking landmark being the Ryugu Palace. Home of Neptune and his family, the King's Palace shines on the most elegantly colored fish of the sea, and can be quite a shock to witness up front. However, regardless of these architectures and devices of the sea, it pales in comparison to the sea forest, where fish and creatures of the sea swim among the wrecks of seafarers that lost their lives getting to the island. But the other tragedy of the island can also be seen in the Fishman District, where the massive ship Noah stands idle on the sea floor, where impoverished fishermen and criminals have become hostile and corrupted by the continued persecution of their race. It's most certainly an island with its own rich value to the series of One Piece, and the most beautiful looking island of them all. Although the only problem I have with the Sea World has to be its layout on a global map. Its other districts and towns that surround the place don't feel as eye-popping as the others, and some areas that we love to see in picture aren't given enough detail to truly care about. I'd have loved to see the dojo where Fishman Karate was invented, but we probably never will, and that's a great shame. But I do think because of its rich history, design, and place in the narrative, Fishman Island will still be remembered as a fantastic place to vacation in, despite its less than stellar reveal. So venture under the sea, but do so at your own discretion.
Number 6.
One of the most important islands Australians have ever landed on, and the major hotspot for all manners of corruption, prejudice, and trickery, Sabaody Archipelago is a center where the heights of hubris make their mark. The environment is solely unique to the region. large mangrove trees that secrete large bubbles around the atmosphere, and without a magnetic pull for log poses to find on their own. It's the final island for pirates to resupply in before their trip to the New World, and is filled to the brim with shady businesses and folks who would try anything to rip unsuspecting folks off. The bubbles formed there are used for a variety of purposes, such as bikes, Ferris wheels, and even as makeshift hotels. Its climate is pleasant throughout the seasons, making a day trip to Sabaody Park much more worth your time. But keep in mind that this is also the major shopping zone for not just brigands and common citizens, but also nobles and the worst of them all, the celestial dragons. Slavery is still common on the island, and despite being barred internationally, is still alive and well in the auction houses on certain groves. It's an island of plastic and vanity, where criminals are not often the worst offenders, that puts less value on the lives of species they deem unworthy. Those are qualifications that put this island not as high on the list as others, but it is still a very important place to be. It's home to some breathtaking moments in the series, and is where all the most powerful pirates who have made their journey through the Grand Line come to meet up. It's got a lot of significance in the series as a whole, and that's thus, while it's an island with very big systemic problems, it's as or more imaginative and compelling of a place to look at compared with more sensible locations in One Piece. Love it or hate the island, is still one of the most important markers in the series' history.
Number 5.
Who knew a scorching hot desert can be such a diverse place to live in? Housing one of the oldest family lines in the history of One Piece, the Kingdom of Alabasta is a place that embodies the resilience and guardianship of their most precious ideals. Family and unity are their pride and joy, stretching to the farthest reaches of the Grand Sandora Desert. Water is a valuable resource that the kingdom needs to operate, and that is why many hospitable villas and posts are erected to help travelers in their journeys. The port city of Nanohana, the natural pools of Yuba, and the casino city of Rainbase are some of the places that welcome desert crawlers with open arms and easy to trade items. Because the desert is a dangerous place, and some areas in Alabasta were not able to handle that amount of danger. Especially when the populace for the longest time were suffering droughts after droughts that led to civil unrest and eventually all-out war. While orchestrated by Crocodile's Baroque works to take over the Desert Kingdom, eventually it was thwarted by a ragtag group of pirates and the Princess of Alabasta, Nefeltari Vivi. It's pretty tough not to make a desert island interesting, as it provides so much activity and culture that more colorful settings seem to mess up with. It's gotta be one of the most important areas in all of One Piece, and was a perfect setting for the finale of the second major saga. It's a memorable location that gets overshadowed a lot in later chapters as newer and more complex islands are introduced, but just for nostalgia and its underrated beauty, Sandy Island or Alabasta certainly quenched my expectations. Although it's kinda weird that Vivi isn't very brown skinned for being in the desert all her life. Now that I think about it, we don't really get a lot of dark-skinned ladies in the series, and even Robin kinda got the whitewash treatment in later episodes. But that's an issue we'll get into another time.
Number 4.
I know the phrase is you can't have your cake and eat it too, but in this large archipelago and with her hunger pangs, you best have all the cakes in the damn world. Despite most of the time spent on Whole Cake Island in the series, this large nation that's filled to the rim with candy galore offers the most in how one person can truly shape a nation. And his service to that figurehead is what places this Disney World paradise on the list. But before the rowdy and immature Charlotte Linland took over, the group of islands were mostly just your typical landmasses with their own well-established governments and kingdoms. But when a hulking girl came in with the strength of a rowdy superstore toddler, the archipelago was taken over and given its identity we know of it today as Totoland. And coming from the mind of presumably Charlotte and the head chef, the islands are built with confectionery and construct, buildings made out of sweets, ministers put in charge of each island's food source, and a big mouth to feed to whenever the call is made out. Whether it be candy that fuel the Big Mom Empire, or pieces of your very soul to help fortify the defenses of the pirate army. It's a cross between Willy Wonka, Alice in Wonderland, and the entire Disney catalog. All races with the exception of giants live there, as it's Big Mom's dream to bring all creatures of the world under her dominion. And at the center of it all is Whole Cake Island, with a large pound cake in the center and the seducing woods barricading the island. It's a paradise of sweets and surface level wholesomeness that many wouldn't assume the worst from, unless you find taxes on your soul and a giant man-child going around and wrecking your livelihood once a week to be the only major hiccups. It's an island mass that presented a lot of imagination as it debuted, and for the most part, it was well deserved. I love its structure, its diversity, and the weird sanctimonious talk that the leaders of the islands have in order to retain power. While the events of the arc are a little dicey in terms of how it handled the story of Whole Cake Island, Total Land regardless has some of the freshest takes on a reverse Wonderland setting, and Oda had a riveting experience coming up with the many creatures, weather, and politics behind the Emperor's territory. And I gotta assume being a dentist in Total Land must be the best occupation in the world. A mix of pleasantries and trepidations, Total Land is a place you'd have to see at least once, but be sure to find the nearest exit, cause it will try its best to never let you leave this Candyland alive.
Number 3.
We head up to the sky for our next entry to one of the most awe-inspiring places in One Piece. Skypiea is what it's colloquially called, but it's more a union between Angel Island and the mysterious Upper Yard, mass jungle surrounding the legendary City of Gold. This was the home of the Shandians, who came to the sky 400 years ago and fought a war against the Skypieans until, you guessed it, the Straw Hats arrived. A land so preposterous to Blue Sea people that even in the logic of the Grand Line is impossible to comprehend. But it exists, and what a sight it was. While not the only Sky Island we'll ever see in the series, the society and practices of the Sky People are some of the best things about this land. Its structures are all cut from the island clouds to keep them afloat, and their everyday items are fueled with the use of dials. The common belief the sounds of the ocean can be held in the seashell is taken up a notch, with dials containing music, smells, and even fire. Some of those dials were even used for combat, as the Skypieans adopted it into their own unique brand of sky warfare. As for Upper Yard, it brought with it an abundance of Verth, something the Skypieans find holy and rare in the islands above the clouds, but it also came with its own faction vowing to protect the lands from trespassers. Thanks to the oxygen increase, the trees and animals have grown massive, while the ruins of the city of Shandora have been sucked into the clouds below, and the sacred bell that once stood in the town square has been moved to the top of the giant beanstalk known as Giant Jack. While its history and prejudices are fascinating to get onto the list in general, the real majesty is in its sense of adventure. Being the first time the Straw Hats ever ventured into the sky, the concept was very fresh in its execution. And while Angel Island would be annihilated after the events of the Skypiea arc, it also brought with it an opportunity to amend the wrongs of the past, sharing the land Upper Yard and vowing to keep on living in harmony with the natives of the land. I would say this is a very romanticized vision of how people wish white folks should have treated people they pillaged and raided centuries before, but then again, I guess it's the thought that counts. Skypiea was a place filled to the brim with trials, exploration, and technology. And even after leaving the island, it's one I think won't be forgotten in the minds of its readers. While it's quite a crack shot to get up there, you won't regret it. Unless, you die getting up there.
Number 2.
How Oda can pack so much reference and Easter eggs into one island is beyond comprehension. Even for a Japanese person, the current arc taking place in the country of Wano has yet to fully finish, but regardless, it still provided the most out of any One Piece island to this date. Scaling the waters tied to the back of a koi fish that then aim upwards to a ginormous waterfall is about as grand an entrance you'll ever get. Wano is an isolated country that's one of the only few not to be associated with the world government, and as such, their customs, politics, and even their currency are different from the outside world. You see it from the perspective of foreigners and how the traditions in Wano certainly paint it as the most grande piece of land we've ever seen. The beautiful flower capital as always in Sakura blooms, the frigid snow that blankets Ringo, even the island of Onigashima that houses giants and demons all adds to the unique puzzle of the country. Being a nation devoted to isolationism, it has a very different way of communication and wording that allows for interesting new perspectives, like with hockey being referred to as Rio, or devil fruits being sorceries. It's also a nation where samurai wander the streets, sumo wrestlers show off their might, and ninjas prowl in service to the shogun. By the time the Straw Hats and the rebel samurai arrive, the island has been turned into a factory to fuel the army of one of the four emperors, Kaido. And with a puppet shogun like Orochi destroying the land, it leaves the majority of the country with polluted waters and starving citizens. It's a deeper expression of what real-life Japan has gone through in its jagged history of imperialism and isolation, and that the idea of opening up borders to the outside world is possibly the best way to keep the culture alive. It's easily one of the most exotic locations ever transcribed by a manga author and holds so many customs and lore to the One Piece world. From its way of swordsmanship to even the poneglyphs scattered around the various seas, there has never been quite a country like Wano to ever bring that much reverence to the series' history. So then, what could be better than an Oda-centric Japan? Before we get to number 1, let's look at the honorable mentions.
Number 1.
No surprise to see the City of Water make it to the cream of the crop in terms of the best places to live in One Piece. I love the art this island takes place in, but I think it's more just the location itself that fueled that high acclaim. The concept of a land purely dictated by the sea around it is always going to be gold, but to add on top of that its society, economy, and unexpected service to the big blue world of One Piece, it is simply the most believable place to explore. Travel along the canals is mostly done through these cute little gremlin mammals called Yagaras, a species of different size and speed that provide a taxi service to the island's citizens. Anything to do with water is there. Food, transportation, and entertainment are all tied around it. But aside from the constructions, the activities, and the culture being great, it's the shipwrights that make this place number 1 in crafting vessels to sail the open sea. The Galley Law Company operates as a neutral front for all people, but aren't soft enough to get away with any chintzy customers bribing them off. But before it became a great city, it was actually more of a place in complete disarray. It was almost on the brink of collapse, as the city has a rough history of slowly sinking into the sea with the annual Aqua Laguna hammering it down. On top of the crisis of pirates raiding supplies, many were at their ends, until the sea train began its trek. The Puffing Tom became the rebirth of the island's lifeline, and with that came expanse and trade to remote islands across the Grand Line. That's where many great items like foods, masks, and books began to open the once sinking city to the free market, even to the degree that the world government had to get in on that opportunity. I always find that the best parts of One Piece islands are that it has to begin somewhere, and that every island, no matter how great they are, needs something to stand apart from each other. Water 7 is an island in constant change, very similar to cities and countries in our world. They have turned their greatest fear into a blessing, and despite the rising tides, they're always striving for future development, picking themselves up time and time again in order to live their lives without hesitation. That is the true reason why I love Water 7. It's not the elaborate designs nor the customs that get me coming back to this place, but it's people, its true heart. It symbolically gestures how much the islands of One Piece are characters in of themselves, much like, say, a ship would be considered a person in theory. Reasons like this and more are why, even in a series with many more islands left to explore, that Water 7 remains the best island to visit, live in, and return to in this wonderful world. And that concludes our exploration of some of the best islands in One Piece. But those are just my opinions. What are your favorite islands to visit in One Piece? Comment down below and please subscribe, because next time we are taking a bite out of some very disgusting fruits. It's your Bra Man signing off.